Namaste Shusha. Welcome students to online session of Business Law. Part 15 Legality of Objective topic आज આપણે study કરશું. Introduction. If an agreement is to be enforced in a court of law, both consideration and object of the agreement must be lawful. When one of the consideration or object is unlawful, the contract is void. શું કહે છે કે ભાઈ કોઈ પણ એગ્રીમેન્ટ છે એ લીગલી એન્ફોર્સેબલ નથી અને એમાં કન્સિડરેશન નથી તો એ કોન્ટ્રાક્ટ કેવો થઈ જાય છે વોઇડ થઈ જાય છે. In order to constitute a valid contract, both consideration as well as object must be lawful, otherwise would be void. શું કહે છે કે ભાઈ વેલિડ કોન્ટ્રાક્ટ માટે બે વસ્તુ હોવી જરૂરી છે, that is object કેવું હોવું જોઈએ lawful and there should be consideration. જો આ બે વસ્તુ નહીં હોય તો void થઈ જશે contract. According to section number 23, the considerations or object of an agreement is lawful unless it is forbidden by law or is of such a nature that if permits it would defeat the provisions of any law, or is fraudulent, or involves or implies injury to the persons or property of another, or the court regard it as immoral or opposed to a public policy. In each of these cases, the considerations or object of an agreement is unlawful, is void. શું કહે છે સેક્શન નંબર 23 પ્રમાણે જે આપણે આ બધા પોઈન્ટ્સ હમણાં આગળ ડિટેલમાં જોશું, રાઈટ? દેટ કે ભાઈ કેવા ઓબ્જેક્ટિવ્સ જેમાં અનલોફુલ એગ્રીમેન્ટ્સ થાય છે, જેમાં કન્સિડરેશન નથી હોતું, એ કેવું થઈ જાય છે void, right? Let us see that section number 23 ના points ડિટેલમાં આપણે જોઈએ અત્યારના. When consideration or object is lawful, પહેલી situation શું હતી? If it is forbidden by law. Law forbids an act for various reasons. If the considerations or the object of an agreement is doing of such an act which is forbidden by law, the agreement is said to be void. For example, a promise B to drop up precautions which he has instituted against B for the robbery, and B promises to restore the value of the things taken, the agreement is void as its object is unlawful. Right? પહેલું શું કહે છે? If it is forbidden by law. હવે કોઈ પણ એગ્રીમેન્ટ છે legally forbidden હોય, right? એટલે કે if the object involves such an act which is quite forbidden by law, તો એવા એગ્રીમેન્ટ કેવાય થઈ જાય છે void થઈ જાય છે. Say for example, bribe for unemployment, right? જોબ મને મળે તો પૈસા હું તમને આપીશ, પૈસા દઈને જોબ ખરીદવી, તો એ શું થઈ ગયું? immoral છે, right? એટલે that is forbidden by law. Same way આમાં illustration આપ્યું છે, A B ને promise કરે છે કે ભાઈ precautions for the robbery, right? robbery લઈને જે પૈસા થયા છે એ પૈસા એ ચૂકવી રહેશે પછી, right? તો robbery છે એ પણ શું થયું? forbidden by law. એટલે objective કેવું થઈ ગયું? unlawful. Second, if it is of such a nature that if permitted it would defeat the provisions of law. It refers to the case where there being no express statutory prohibitions against a particular types of contract, the nature of the contract is such that it would be against the spirit of a particular law, whether enacted or otherwise. For example, An agreement between the husband and wife to live separately is invalid as being opposed to Hindu law. Right? આ શું કહેવા માંગે છે કે અહીંયા object of agreement is such that which is not directly prohibited by law, but when performed it defeats or violates any law or more provisions of law. Say for example, like Hindu ધર્મના હિસાબે, right? Husband wife છે, they live together, separately they live કરતા નથી. It is according opposed to or invalid to Hindu law. Same way બીજું example આપીએ છીએ sale or transfer of license, right? તો ઈ પણ valid કહેવાય નહીં. ત્રીજું, if it is fraudulent, it refers to a contract which are entered into between the parties with an object which is fraudulent or with a purpose which will in effect promotes fraud. For example, A promises to pay rupees 200 to B if B would commit a fraud on C. B's agreeing to defraud is unlawful considerations for A's promise to pay. Hence, the agreement is illegal and void. B example શું છે? A, B and C enter into an agreement for the divisions among them of gaining, acquiring, or to be acquired by them by fraud. The agreement is void as its objective is unlawful. Right? Prudential activities છે એમાં પેલું illustration થી સમજાવ્યું છે કે ભાઈ A, B અને C contract માં enter થાય છે. A, B ને કહે છે કે હું તને promise કરું છું કે હું તને પે કરી દઈશ, promise to pay 200 rupees. અગર B commit fraud with C, B C ની સાથે fraud કરે તો આવી ટાઈપના એગ્રીમેન્ટ કેવા થઈ જાય છે? ઇલીગલ થઈ જાય છે, that is void. બીજું કેસમાં શું કે છે? ABC છે એગ્રીમેન્ટમાં એન્ટર થાય છે. હવે ઈ એગ્રીમેન્ટ ફ્રુડન્ટલી કરાવવામાં આવે છે તો એ પણ void થઈ જશે. એટલે આપણે કહી શકીએ an agreement which is made for a prudential purpose is a void. Your intention of the party is to conduct any fraud. Right? Fourth point, if it involves or implies injury to the person or property of another. If the object of an agreement is to cause injury to the person or property of another, it is unlawful. Injury means criminal or wrongful harm. An agreement to commit an assault is void. For example, an agreement by which a debtor who borrowed rupees 100 promises to do manual labor without pay for the creditor so long as the debt was not repaid in full has been held to be void as it involves injury to the person of the debtor. Agreement છે, એગ્રીમેન્ટમાં શું કહે છે? ડેપ્ટરને એમ કે જ્યાં સુધી હું પૈસા ન ભરી દઉં તમારા 100 રૂપિયા ત્યાં સુધી તમારી પાસે મફતમાં કામ કરીશ. ઘણા ટાઈમ સુધી મફતમાં કામ કરે છે પણ પૈસા નથી ચૂકવી શકતો તો આમાં સામેવાળા પર્સન છે, right? It implies injury to the person, right? એટલે ઈ કેવું થઈ જાય છે? Unlawful. બીજું શું કહે છે? An agreement between some persons to purchase shares in a company and thus by the prudential and incentive to induce other persons to believe that there is a bona fide market for the shares is void. કોઈને છેતરીને prudential activity through એમ કહે છે કે ના ભાઈ આ શેર સારા છે કંપનીના તમે પરચેસ કરો, રાઈટ? તો એ પણ વેલિડ કહેવાય નહીં. આપણે કહી શકીએ છીએ કે if it involves injury to the person or any property. Injury means શું થઈ જાય છે અહીંયા damages. Means any damages or harm to any person or to property includes movable as well as immovable. Right? Next, if the court regard it as immoral, agreements which are contrary to the good morals are illegal and void. If the consideration for the agreement is an act of sexual immorality, the agreement is illegal. For example, A agrees to let her daughter to be for concubinage, means a state of living together as a man and wife without being married. This agreement is unlawful and immoral. Simple ભાષામાં કહી, if the court considered કોઈ પણ વસ્તુને if immoral કહે છે તો એવી સિચ્યુએશનમાં unlawful agreement consideration એ નથી અને object છે ઈ unlawful છે, illegal છે. Say for example, live-in relationship, and the second example is business of prostitution, right? એ બે immoral છે society માટે. Sixth point, where the court regard it as opposed to public policy, right? જે વસ્તુ public policy ને oppose કરે છે એ પણ આવી જાય છે. એ આપણે અત્યારના ડિટેલમાં જોશું. નોટ, આ 6th point છે એ અલગથી શોર્ટ નોટમાં પણ પૂછાય છે. શોર્ટ નોટનું હેડિંગ આવશે એગ્રીમેન્ટ ટુ ઓપોઝ ટુ પબ્લિક પોલિસી. ઓકે, so an agreement is said to oppose to public policy when it is harmful to the public welfare. જે પબ્લિક વેલફેર માટે કોઈ પણ વસ્તુ હાર્મફુલ હોય છે, that is known as agreement opposed to public policy against the interest of society, right? શું કહે છે? એ સોસાયટીના ઇન્ટરેસ્ટની અગેન્સ્ટ હોય છે, which affects the moral of the publicના મોરલને હર્ટ કરે છે. Generally an agreement which is injurious to public. Agreement છે public માટે injurious છે, right? That are agreement opposed to public policy. Agreement opposed to public policies ના પોઈન્ટ્સ છે જે લિસ્ટ આઉટ કરેલા છે, જે આપણે તેના સ્ટડી કરશું. Very first is agreement of trading with enemies. The agreement of trading with enemies માં શું કહે છે? An agreement made with alien enemy are illegal on ground of public policy, right? Say for example, India and Pakistan, right? Being વચ્ચે agreement હોય trading, that is illegal. Second, agreement to commit a crime. Agreement to commit a crime. કે કોઈ પણ crime, criminal activity શું છે? તો એ કોઈને ગમે? No છે, but obvious છે. તો એ બધી શું થઈ ગઈ? agreement opposed to public policy માં કહેવાય છે. તો આપણે કહી શકીએ it is opposed to public policy when the consideration is in an agreement is to commit a crime that is opposed to public policy to indemnity a person against consequences of his criminal act is opposed to public policy. Okay? Criminal activities હોય છે, that is opposed to public policy. એનું એક્ઝામ્પલ આપણે કહી શકીએ Okay, two or more courts. Wait. Agreement oppose sorry commit to crime, right? Criminal aspects ની સાથે હોય છે, that is opposed to public policy. Next is agreement with interfere with administrations of justice. Administration of justice ની સાથે concern છે, એ agreement છે, એની વાત કરે છે. Say for example, two or more courts had in a particular case jurisdictions to try the matter. An agreement between parties that the dispute between them shall be tried in one of such a court is not contrary to public policy. Right? Let's look here. Okay, agreement which interferes with administration of justice. For example, agreement not to prosecute an offender. Fourth, agreement which interferes with legal administration. એટલે કે જે agreement legal administration ની સાથે concern છે, to interfere with legal matters, right? તો એવા agreement છે, એ પણ opposed to public policy include થાય છે. લીગલી ઇન્ટરફિયરન્સ હોય છે, એને પણ આપણે એની અંદર ઇન્ક્લુડ કરીએ છીએ. Next is trafficking in public offices and titles. Trafficking in public offices and titles, an agreement by which it is intended to induce a public servant to act corruptly is regarded as against public policy. Right? In the same way, the agreement to pay money to a public servant to induce him to act corruptly is contrary to public policy. Similarly, agreement for the sale or transfer of public offices and titles for monetary considerations are unlawful and being opposed to the public policy. Right? Next is agreement in restraints of parental rights. Allegation an agreement which prevents a parent to exercise his right to rights of guardianship. Then 8 point agreement in restraint of personal liability. Personal liability ની સાથે concern છે. For example, an agreement by a debtor to do manual labor for creditors so long as the debt does not repaid in full is void as being against public policy. Next chair, agreement tending to create monopoly. Agreement tending to create monopoly are void, being opposed to public policy. Again, there can be no monopoly rights given to a person to the exclusion of others. in matters like selling of clothes, vegetables, etc. Next, agreement restricting force of right, enforcement of rights. Also, an agreement which wholly or parental prohibits any part from the enforcing of his right. 10th point, marriage brokerage contract. Here the receiver the money as considerations of marriage is opposed to public policy. Next one is agreement interfering with marriage duties. Marriage duties or marital duties. An agreement which interferes with the performance of marital duty is void. For example, an agreement to lend money to a woman in consideration of her getting a divorce and marrying the lender is void. Next, agreement in restraint of trade is also void. An agreement is opposed to public policy. 13. Agreement to defraud to revenue authorities. Defrauding to revenue authorities is also void, and the agreement is against the public policy. What is unlawful and illegal agreement? Unlawful and illegal means pretty much the same things. An unlawful agreement is one which is like a void agreement is not enforceable by law. It is void and is destitute of legal effects, although it affects only the immediate parties and has no further consequences. An illegal agreement is not only void as between the immediate parties but has his further effect that collateral transactions to it also becomes strained while illegal. શું કે છે unlawful ને illegal agreement છે એ contract છે એ void છે એ ખાલી particular party જેની સાથે contract હોય છે એને effect કરે છે. એમાં આગળ કોઈ પણ further transactions possible નથી થતા કારણ કે lawful unlawful objective as well as illegal agreement ના કારણે contract void થઈ જાય છે. Example, L lent rupees 5,000 to B, help him to purchase some prohibited goods from T, an alien enemy. If B enters into an agreement with a T, the agreement will be illegal and the agreement between B and L will also become illegal. Collateral to the main transactions which is illegal, L cannot therefore recover the amount. He can recover the amount if he did not know the purpose of the loan. Where L છે B ને એમ કે છે હું તને 5,000 રૂપિયા આપીશ બધી વસ્તુ પરચેસ કરવા માટે. હવે L ને ખબર છે કે બધી goods છે એ prohibited છે અને T alien enemy છે એની પાસેથી લેવાનું છે. ઓબ્જેક્ટિવ કેવું થઈ ગયું આપણું ઇલીગલ થઈ ગયું. હવે ઇલીગલ કામ માટે ઇલીગલ એગ્રીમેન્ટ માટે કાંઈ થાય નહીં. હવે એલ છે એને એના ટ્રાન્ઝેક્શન્સ કરે છે અને એને પૈસાની રિકવરી નથી મળતી, રાઈટ? શું કામ? કારણ કે એને ખોટા કામ માટે ઇલીગલ વસ્તુ માટે પૈસા રોક્યા હતા. હેન્સ it is opposed to a public policy and objective is unlawful, illegal and unlawful. Effect of illegality, where the illegality is severable, reciprocal promises, alternative promise, one branch being illegal, agreements void if considerations and objective unlawful in part. Okay, अच्छा. Illegal ની effect શું હોય તો એગ્રીમેન્ટ void થઈ જાય છે, રાઈટ, કારણ કે એમાં કન્સિડરેશન હોતું નથી ને ઓબ્જેક્ટ કેવું છે, અનલોફુલ છે એટલે. You can also use element of mercantile law by Andy Kapoor for the reference book of business law. Thank you. Have a nice time.